Here to present about Husserl's critique of psychologism. So, historical background for this psychologism is late in 19th century. There was at the end of 19th century, psychologism was emerging as an experimental science. So there was a rise in empirical psychology. So the crisis for that during that point was logic was mainly treated as a psychological discipline. So now let's see what is psychologism. The theory that logical laws are grounded in psychological process. The core claim of this is logic is viewed as a brand of psychology. So let's see Mill's view. So logic, according to Mill, logic simply describes how the mind actually operates. Laws of thoughts are equated to the laws of logic. Now let's see with an example of fire and water. Logic that A is not means fire is not water, which means it says uh, we perceive fire and immediately associate it with heat. So that is a direct observation, and the experience we have never experienced a freezing fire. Our sensory experience is consistent and non-contradictory. So basically, we haven't experienced the water or its cold. So that's why, because of this mental habit that uh, how do you say, because of this whole continuous repetition, we feel that fire is related to heat, not water. So law of non-contradiction is not a universal truth of the universe. It is a simply psychological inability to believe that two contradictory things at once based on our history of sensory data. Uh, uh, let's get to the main objective of Husserl. Based on primary this So logic as a habit. Let's take this as example: fire and water. Observation: we perceive fire and immediately associate with heat. And the experience for this is we have never experienced freezing fire. We haven't experienced like as cold as water. So our sensory experience is consistent and non-contradictory. Psychological association. Over time, this consistency creates a mental habit. We become psychologically incapable of imagining a contradiction. Let's say even if we are, let's say we are feeling the heat, will not relate it to the freezing cold actually. So here means core conclusion is law of contradiction. A is not A, which means fire. We can't be relating it with freezing cold. So, law of contradiction is not a universal truth of the universe. It is simply a psychological inability to believe two contradictory things at once based on our history of sensory data. Uh, uh, the primary text for this Husserl critique of psychologism is logical investigation. This is what I've ever referred. So, the main aim of Husserl is to completely refute psychologism to save logic. And the vision is to establish logic as pure and normative science, descriptive versus normative. Psychology is more descriptive. It describes like how we actually think, and it is empirical and contingent. And when it comes to logic, it is how we are taught to think, and it is necessary and universal. Let's see with an example that is gambler's fallacy. Let's say if you are flipping a coin for 5 times, and if all the 5 times if it comes as head, psychologically we'll be thinking that next time we would get this urge to bet on tails. But what logic says is there's always a 50-50 chance. So that is what it shows. Imagine a person flipping a coin, it has landed hit 5 times in a row. So psychologically, person will be urging to bet on tails, believing it is due to change. This describes how human mind actually tends to think. But logic says probability state that next flip is exactly 50 by 50, so it can either be heads or tails. Logic dictates how we are taught to think and remain consistent with truth, regardless of our gut feeling or mental biases. Problem of relativism. The logical flaw. If logic depends on psychology, then different individuals with different psychologies would have different logics. This leads to logical relativism, which undermines universal truth. Houses defense logical principles remain valid regardless of whether anyone believes them. Uh, Let's go to the key point: ideal versus the real. The real acts, temporal mental events, which are like physical act of thinking. Ideal meanings are objective and timeless entities, or else it is truth by itself. So basically, act of thinking that 2 plus 2 is 4 is psychological, but the truth is 2 plus 2 4 is ideal, objective, and independent of human psychology. So whether it is not psychological, it is more ideal and objective. Uh, Now let's get to the other example scenario. Imagine there is a 500 digit number which human or computer never checked. So whether it is a prime or composite. So psychologically, because no one has referred to that number, there is no mental act or psychological event associated with its primality. But logically, it is either prime or composite. So number is already either prime or composite. The status doesn't change the moment a mathematician discusses it. Mathematician simply uncover it as ideal truth that was already there. Now conclusion, foundational impact. This critique is established for the foundation of phenomenology and preserving truth. By separating ideal meanings from psychological act, Husserl preserved universality in logic, modern relevance. These arguments remain central to contemporary debates on meaning and truth. These are my references and logical investigations and Java.